Thank you very much, Lucrezia. And hi, everyone. Thanks for being here, and thanks for the invitation to come to speak to you. My English should be fine, but that said, I am Spanish, so it could happen that I make up a word. And if that happens and it's totally non-understandable, by all means, gesture, and I'll try to make up another one. But regularly, even the fake words somehow make sense in the overall scheme of things. And, well, as you all know, speaking about one's work and showing pictures of it is very different from actually having you experience it. And so I was thinking long and hard about, the context of this talk and how I would make it actually be worth your whiles. And it became quite obvious for me that the thing to focus on is what you don't get in an exhibition, which is actually what's behind the work, the ideas, the stress, the questions, and the mess, and my attempt in transforming this mess into insights that I can actually convey to you. So in a way, the projects I will show you will be sort of vehicles that will allow me to communicate with you where I stand today regarding my art practice, and more importantly, what I have been able to discern so far about this wonderful mess that is being an artist. So, speaking of wonderful things, I don't know if you've noticed today's date, but is this going to work? Yeah, so December the 12th, the 12th of the 6th, so December 6th, is actually a permutation of 2016. And you may think that this is the most ridiculous way of starting a presentation, and that this is very banal as a thing, but it's actually very central to the first point I want to make to you, which is that, these quirks that we tend to dismiss are actually manifestations of a very own particularly brand of glitches and the ways in which we function. And I have found it extremely important so far in my art practice to be able to discover, to get to know what those inner glitches are, and learning to work with them in a way that is conducive to doing new projects. And I've got many of them, and I would be very, very long as a presentation to go over every single one. But I will just give you one significant example. So my brain tends to do this thing where it will just literally flood me regularly with ideas and desires and new things for projects that I want to accomplish. And to be able to live with this, I created this little side project that I call the Department of Speculation. And what really this is just a sort of an anarchic archive that I have, where in the first moment what I will do is just sort of unload everything that's coming to me in sort of a stream of consciousness fashion, and if anything particularly resonates to a current project I'm working on, I will pursue it, or if there is something that seems to be very compelling to dig in, I will, and then the rest will just remain sort of, trapped in the pages of those notebooks, but very importantly out of my head. And so what this does is, first of all, it allows you to get some distance from that initial enthusiasm that sort of invades you when you're having a new idea. But at the same time, it does capture that moment of inspiration and the thrill and the clarity that you feel when you have a new thing that you want to do. And in a way, it lies there ready, waiting for me to sort of be stuck or be in the need for doing a new project. And so when this happens, I will go into one of my harvesting swipes, in which I will go back to all these notebooks, and then I'll start taking notes of all the interesting bits and pieces in these little cards, and then I'll start sort of trying to connect them and arrange them. And I have been told that I look sort of like a weird fortune teller with these tables full of these papers. And before you get to worry about me manifesting the first signs of a gallopant OCD, be sure that this is just one part of the way I work. It's kind of a solution I have found to coexist with my head. But very thankfully, there is a very different way in which I also work, which is sort of this very pleasant, very interesting rhythm and state I will get into with the studio rhythm, where my mind will start sort of gradually be invaded by this sort of state of not really knowing what I'm doing, but just sort of messing around in the studio, and it feels almost like I'm not paying much attention, and so things will start to accumulate and build up, and risking to sound a bit like a Harry Potter movie, I've called this sort of a parallel state of mysterious activities, because I love giving names to things, as you've seen. And so in this sort of parallel state, it's almost like I'm behaving without really trying to pay too much attention to myself, and doing these, things on the side. And what's specific about this moment is that when I'm in this state, I will react very differently to certain feelings that arise in me, and to which in my normal life I will have a very different response to. And these feelings can be, for instance, puzzlement, or vertigo, or fear, or wonder. And in regular life, when they come, I will very often try to kind of repress them and manage them, and it doesn't happen in this parallel state of mysterious activities. And so I'm just going to give you an example. Okay, I'm going to just start showing you work, because you're probably getting impatient. So I will tell you this story, and then I'll show you the work. I had been in one of these wonderful moods, and I had been coveting this very particular paper, and had gotten the attention of this huge graphite bar. And by now I can really tell when I covet really desire things, because the moment they just enter my field of perception and I see them, something in me will go like, I want it, and it's like this sort of golem in me that it's become very dear to me, and somehow the golem got the materials into my studio, and he's very good at just dropping all these things around and having them ready for me to just kind of come across them. And so I was, this stuff was around, and I was goofing around, and I suddenly thought about somebody who had spoken of trying to do the worst possible drawing you could ever muster, and that had sort of stuck to my mind, and so kind of faking I was just having a walk, I sort of started, going towards the most horribly cheesy, terrible pictures I could find lying around, and I have tons of things lying around, and just sort of, these are just moments where you're kind of not totally there, and I just had a go at it, and then this happened, this guy happened, and then this happened, and then a couple of drawings, and some time later this happened, and yet more drawings, and more time later, and as they went on, this happened, and then this series started happening, and these other guys, and I remember perfectly the feeling of utter puzzlement when I saw them. And I was just there in my studio, especially with the first ones, and I was asking them, who are you? Where do you come from? I don't draw these kind of things. This is not the kind of drawing I do. So what is essential at this point, and what risked the lives of these guys, was that I didn't react in the way I would have normally reacted to my puzzlement, which is just kind of banishing them and repressing them, or sort of getting angry at them. I don't know if it happens to you, but I used to get very, very angry at many of my work. And I don't anymore. I've become much more livable. And so I gave them a chance to stay and not really judge them. And I just accepted that I would be in this state where I really didn't understand if they were any good and whether they would take me anywhere in particularly. And withholding that state of puzzlement, learning to feel it and be like, oh, I'm in just one of those moments where I don't really know what's happening, but keep going. That was really, really important as a realization for me in producing new work. And not kind of throwing a tantrum because I couldn't completely master and understand and explain and justify everything that was going on. And this did take me places because it started this thing in motion where I started realizing that I could make this whole new set of images where they just kind of happen. They are images that they just don't belong to what I know to be my personal mental landscape. I just cannot imagine them in advance. And so I started in parallel this other project where I just, again, very randomly took this very blurry photo of a child and just did a portrait of it. And then I did another portrait of it. And another portrait of it with this very special paper and this very special graphite. And then one portrait became another portrait, and then another portrait. And then all these guys starting appearing from the little child. And I got more of them, and yet again even more. And the reason why they were happening, the reason why they were appearing is that not only had I learned to sustain this sort of feeling of not really understanding what was going on, but I had actually learned to appreciate something new, which is that the material was doing something magical, which is, I discovered that for me, if it glides just right, ça glisse juste comme il faut, if that happens, then they happen, then things happen. So, it was very, very odd as a realization, but being able to have this new way of working with materials where I could draw and destroy and draw again and destroy and have things glide just about right, just make them be. And that was as important as accepting that I didn't know where the work was taking me. And so I was very thrilled and very interested about these sort of images that don't belong to your imagination but just happen before you. And I wondered, can all these things that I've just learned be transposed to all the mediums and other circumstances? And I mean, the goal is not to show you every single picture because there's heaps of them. But I tried to then go on and say, okay, what would happen if I tried to have a go at oil, but instead of thinking, how should one paint with oil? I would think about, how one makes oil glide and slide in that precisely wonderful way it should, and how can one make things appear and disappear and deform until these new guys appear, and then more kept coming, and the work kept growing. And point is not for me to show you the whole of the series, but what I really tried to show you here is not only how I learned to live with these new qualities and these new ways of being when producing the work, but really almost show you there's like two things going on, like almost two approaches to the work that in my personal Cristina way of being myself, happen, which is, on the one side, there's this sort of mechanisms for, certainty and control and being able to will things into being and to give them meaning and give them direction and sense and organizing them and archiving them and all these things. I've even got a cemetery for dead ideas for the Department of Speculation, by the way, and a parking for the ones I'm not totally ready to let go of, so there is sort of a limbo. And so weird as it may be, there's all these mechanisms. And then on the other side, you've got these other mechanisms which are about, discovery and openness and create, not willing something into happening, but actually creating the conditions for certain things to unravel. And there's actually not one or the other that's better. What I've found out is that for me there's this odd dance where there will be a circulation and sort of an interworking and an interplay between the two of them. And so with this kind of motion in place and this back and forth between what looks like obsessiveness, compulsiveness, and sort of high state, natural high state of sort of vaporous mystery. Projects start arising, and in a way, for me, I've started sort of knitting this kind of rhizomic way, sort of network of projects where I call them also the cocotte pots. It's like I've got all these little pots just around, and I've got different fires, and they're at different moments, and they're not cooking just yet all at the same time, and so certain things will stop boiling, and I'll have to take care of them, and then certain situations will arrive, people will have to come, and I'll just have to put on the gas to something else, and so in this fashion I go on about my life and about doing work. And so this was the first thing that for me was important and interesting to share with you, this kind of dynamics and these little details about going about the life of doing the work. So far I've been telling you about, in this sort of weird network of projects and interests, I've been telling you about very classical mediums like drawing and painting, and I haven't told you about map making, which I'm obsessed with, and writing and all these other things, because then it would take ages and we'd probably have to move in all together somewhere or something like that. But this doesn't mean, the fact that I have opened up and totally embraced very traditional media doesn't mean that I've turned my back on the work that I used to do before in innovation, as a designer in tech, and my training as an engineer. And if anything, what these other disciplines and the practice of drawing and painting and learning about the parallel state of mysterious, I don't even remember the end of mysterious things that are going on, is that they have given me a completely new set of eyes and completely new insights to look at those experiences and all that knowledge that I had gathered for many years. And so this sort of starts being more visible, and the technology and the also embracing the areas I used to work on is kind of more present in the next project I'm going to show you. And I'm going to have a sip of water. And so, again, for reasons unfathomable to me, the golem managed to get hold of this robot. And I just set off making these experiments in collaborative drawing with it. And so this robot is a robotic drawing platform, and he is very obedient. He will do exactly what you tell him to, and he will draw exactly what you give him. And in a way, he's a little bit condemned, like Sisyphus, to always doing exactly what he's told. He doesn't have much of a will of his own. And even though he seems to maybe anyone just sort of a slightly discombobulated printer, or sort of a funny original printer that you can just use with a pen, I saw more in it. And I actually decided to call him Pi, like the cipher, because he looked kind of square. But I could suspect there was it was much more infinite and irrational than what it appeared to be. This is actually a super geeky joke. If you were into math, you would be laughing your hearts out, because pi is an irrational, infinite number. Anyway, I've just educated you on ciphers now. And so I could have set about trying to collaborate with pi in a sort of technical, dominating, invasive way, where I would have gone, okay, I'm going to open you up, and I'm going to look at your inners, and I am going to check your code, and I'm going to make you become this, plastic surgery pie, where you have gone through this major transformation, you've got artificial intelligence, and it will probably take me, I don't know how much time and resources and funding and finding people to code, or I would have to be code wizard. And I just thought I would take more of the toddler in the playground approach to like making friends, and I'll just go and push it, you know, and say hi. How do you want to play? So here's a little snippet of the first sort of tests I did while trying to work with him. So here he's at his best behavior, you know, doing a nice, orderly portrait. And here's me sort of making friends. Okay, so what happened here is that I didn't try to make Pi be anything he's not, but I tried to play around what he couldn't not be, you know, and that was a really weird sentence. Anyway, so I just tried to work with what I had and not try to make it be something he was not, and try to make with his work with his limitations. So the first thing I discovered is that you can actually, in a very painterly way, just make this robot very easily lose his points of reference, and so he gets lost very easily, which allows you to introduce very interesting deformations and alterations into the drawing. And of course, if you then let the golem go wild and get some really interesting materials that go, you know, all gooey when you put water on them, and then you start getting kind of very interesting deformations and a very simple portrait of someone. But it was also very interesting because I started, you know, discovering all these details that for me were kind of fascinating and completely useless and fake. But for instance, I started working with these Sharpies on rice paper. And what's very interesting about alcohol-based Sharpies is that if you leave them on the rice paper and don't move, a pool will start emerging, right? And so I haven't got that one here. You can slightly see it a bit with that material, but I had this beautiful portrait where suddenly there will be these pools. And in a way, for me, it was a cartography of Pi's moment of hesitation, you know. It's like, why did he stop there? I mean, was he scared? Was he concerned because I was looking too close to him? Or like, was he not sure he would make the perfect nose this time because his computations would get all mixed up? And so I started wondering, you know, about how he worked, and looking at him and realizing that he had this sort of life of his own. And very interestingly, also, I tried to start messing with him a little bit, but not in a very mean way. So for that kind of a drawing, what I did is, so he will go and draw, and then and draw, right? And so what I thought was, okay, I'm going to invert it, and I'm going to actually have him lift the pen when he's supposed to draw, and draw when he's walking. And I was very surprised that actually the portrait that emerges is quite interesting also, because it's totally part of the series. It totally makes sense. And I suddenly realized I had somehow drawn like his inner mind, because that's kind of how he thinks, how he's calculating to make the drawing. And in a way, it was almost like the drawing of an algorithm. So I started sort of launching in all these elucubrations that could, again, take a lot of time. And I got to show these to the director of Centre des Arts d'Anguin-les-Bains, and I was very lucky because he asked me to participate to last year's biennial of digital arts. And so what was at stake for the biennial was that it was about arts and science, and I thought it would be very interesting to kind of pursue this research where I was trying to figure out how far I could go with Pi without really kind of having an imperialist intervention on his persona. I created this performance, and for 5 days, for 8 hours a day, we created this simulation of my studio space, and I was just drawing there with Pi, the one and only file. So I was always drawing exactly the same picture over and over again, and the whole sort of bet, or the challenge was that it would never be twice the same portrait, and how, in a way, Pi encountering me with my exhaustion after 6 hours, or how people, bumping into me and seeing me work and interacting with me would make, it's almost like how the humans would come and save him from his punishment of just always doing exactly what he was told. And it was kind of the encounter of my will and his, and somebody else's. So with this in spirit, we set out to create the scenography and do the performance, and this is sort of a really short documentary style kind of video of what happened there. So here you can see that at some moments I was feeling very chatty, and even if there were mediators, I was very happy to talk to people, and there were other moments I really didn't want to talk to anyone, especially after a couple of hours. I mean, don't get me started on the last day. The last day was quite tough. And mysterious things happened, like for some reason I got hold of these 30 kids and I just started making up this weird story about what was happening with the robot, and we just had a blast for 30 minutes. Actually, the golem told them that Monoprix washing alcohol is great for messing up with the ink of the crayons I was using, so we created this human chain of finger drawing, and everybody afterwards had the black finger and felt absolutely part of a club, and an experience that was totally wonderful for them. Some came back with their parents and their golems had seen mine, and they had just had a wonderful blast. And this was a very interesting moment as well, because this kid was running wild, and I just grabbed him and I just put him in front of the robot. And he was actually one of the most free at just having a go at Pi and trying to do something with him and alter the portrait. And he was, by the way, very clear about where he wanted his work to be hung, which I thought was brilliant and very humbling. And this was another wonderful moment because we had the techno music concert on the background, and so with this kid we just looked at each other and I said, why don't we dance and draw? This could be what makes this drawing special. And so we just had a wonderful time making other guys slightly jealous. And so, even some of the people, older people, really got into it and really started developing, these ways of interacting with it and trying to do something with it and alter it. And I don't know if you've seen, but these guys got this rhythm going on. And some more moments were at the end of the day and I was alone and getting a good, nice moment by myself, just not having to talk to anybody and just mess around with pie and. Yeah. So I was not forced to go all the way, I was saying in French, but I'm happy to say that we did end up filling the whole wall and doing the 54 drawings that were pre-pinned as sheets of paper in there. And I don't know if you've noticed between the first projects I was showing you and these, but there is a common thing, which is that in the first drawings I was telling you about, I had started experimenting with doing things in unexpected ways, in ways that were somehow wrong, that were not supposed to be the way you work with things, and challenging existing preconceptions I didn't even know I had about, drawing and painting. And when I moved on to these sort of projects, I had been able to observe this and think about this. So this sort of trying to discover how can one fruitfully misuse a tool like pie was much more explicit and much more something I was trying to do consciously. And it's sort of in this spirit that the next project happened. And I don't know if you've noticed that there is a slight sort of obsessiveness with when, once I get into something, I mean, this blurry picture has given me more slack than any picture ever has given anyone, I think. And it's not finished because the next sort of thing I've been working on is further experiments in collaborative drawing. But this time it was about drawing with two brains connected to one hand. And you may wonder, what? And so this project is in collaboration with an artist friend called Bastien Didier, and he's particularly obsessed with this thing called brain-computer interfaces. I don't know if you've heard about OpenBCIs. If not, I will give you a quick intro. I won't get technical, and I won't speak about infinite irrational ciphers anymore, I promise. So this OpenBCI thing is basically a democratization of electroencephalogram. The word is gone in English. So, this thing that gives you the electrical map of the brain, the thing in the movies, like the IRMs, but in a kind of cheaper, simpler version, sort of Far West, carry it in your pocket version of an IRM. And so basically this thing can be connected to your cortex, to the most external part of your cortex, and it can capture the electrical activity and signals that are just kind of snapping around that. And then it sends all these electrical signals to the computer, which has a program based on processing and other things that can actually analyze these signals. And depending on the shape of this signal, here's what's crazy, one can tell what's going on in the brain and what's happening for the brain. This, of course, is a field for people to do PhDs in, and there's a lot of people kind of really digging into this. And my friend is just obsessed with trying to use this thing for all sorts of things like, I don't know, moving things with your mind and that kind of stuff. And so he invited me to try it. And the first thing that is kind of very easily that he could get to work with is this peak at 10 hertz. And this peak at 10 hertz is a very particular signal that you can produce in a very particular way. And when I saw that, I had been sort of in this way, I get to just somehow learn about things, and the golem just has a blast looking at things. I had been looking at other people who were working with electrostimulation. I don't know if you've heard about TENS stimulators. Is this thing for lazy people who want to work on their apps and have a beer and watch football at the same time, and go. And so you'll be like working out and just basically doing nothing, and you'll be like moving around in a very weird way. And so I said, why don't we hack this? And why don't we actually, instead of making you move something in the computer, why don't you make my arm move? And then what would it mean to try to draw with your brain and mine and acting on my hand? And that's exactly what I'm going to show you right now. By the way, of course, what we did is I started first doing his portrait because it was kind of interesting to do a portrait, self-portrait with his brain and mine and all. But in the end, we ended up drawing again the little girl for like ages and started doing this series. And this actually went into a group show where all the 4 series of the oils and the initial graphites and the robots drawings and the brain drawings were all there. All 140 of them were hanging there. And of course, the accrochage was called autant que faire se peut, which is basically translated into as much as one can master or something like that. And it was particularly appropriate for this pure picture that had been completely exhausted into becoming everything that she could have become and never dreamt of, and probably didn't even care about becoming in the first place. And so during the opening of the show, what we decided was to leave the last row of the brain drawings empty and actually do them live. And what you're going to see is a really short snippet of actually this happening. And when you hear this weird, that's actually the energy of his brain sparking in a thing called a relay and sending current to my arm. So when you see my arm moving like this, that's not me. When I'm moving like this, that's me, okay? So I'll just let you have a look. So that's not me. And there's the blurry picture. And that's the machine that's sending the waves to the computer that are being processed. And that's how he's connected through his earlobes and And so you can see the electrodes that are connected there, and I try not to be too present and not to look too much to the drawing. You can feel it. It hurts if I try to go against it. And so somehow I will try to withdraw, and at some point the portrait will emerge and I will just decide it's done. And here you have a very quick overview of the portraits that we did using this particular technique. So that was sort of the brain series of a little girl. And I had all these very insightful things noted down, and I don't want to miss them because I'm good with time, which is absolutely wonderful, and I'm as thrilled as with the date almost. So what I wanted to tell you about this is that working on this was implying that we were setting up a double level of connection. First of all, we were creating a new level of bodily connection because we were creating this sort of external electrical system that was able to connect physically our bodies in this sort of prosthetic nervous system. Very cheap, by the way, but prosthetic nevertheless. And through this extension Bastian's raw mental energy could suddenly be directed to my arm, which still retained the freedom to sort of give direction and coordinates, but had completely lost the ability to master, like pi, pen up, pen down. He had become me, and I was pi, in a way, because I had this program in my mind of where I was going, and he was being able to sort of mess with me, but not in a very precise way. It's not a joystick. And this brings us to the second level of connection, which is really a very different way in which you sort of mentally connect and try to collaborate with someone. On Bastian's side, there's this very beautiful thing that I haven't told you about, the 10 hertz peak, which is that in order for him to generate that peak, in order for him to send me his energy, he actually has to let go. He has to enter this state of meditative abandonment. And I just thought it was utterly poetic that somebody had to abandon himself to dominate something instead of the other way around, because we're used to domination and control being about, applying force and mastering things intense way. And this was about not being totally able to control things and thus gaining access to something. And on my side, as you've seen, I don't know if you noticed how I tried to not look too much, and it was very interesting because it was a very odd way of, first of all, I was trying to be lost, like, when a python is looking at you, I was just trying to be lost in the blurry pixels of the little girl that I have to tell you, I had to take all the drawings down for a couple of months because I had gone in complete overdose afterwards. But I was just kind of lost in the pixels, and I actually wait for him to send me the energy. So it's like the energy is the ink. And this was something I had to figure out by trying, because at the beginning I was drawing him and his interventions were like dots in my line. They were interruptions in my line, whereas I realized I really had to wait for him to just send me the energy, and that would give me the initiative. So there were all these ways in which I had to think about how to collaborate with him, and how do you make use of something that has no direction and doesn't really tell you what to do, and try to steer it in the right direction, yet giving it as much protagonism and control as possible. It's kind of this, it's almost like managing people in a way. If you've ever managed somebody, if you don't, then you'll know what I mean in a couple of years. And so, ultimately, it completely blurred the lines of what we thought was collaborating with somebody and drawing, and what authorship means, because, in the end, whose drawing is it? Is it my drawing? Is it his drawing? Is it our drawing? And so this posed a lot of questions that were quite interesting. And again, I realized that, like the other projects around this autant que faire se peut and many of other things I was doing, it was all about these notions of who controls who, what controls what. Does these things that take over me and make me do the portraits are the things that are in control, or is it me? Is it Pi? Is it Bastien? And in a way, this is where, I don't know if anybody has read the intro poster for my talk, where I talk about all these weird things. This is where suddenly I think you can probably understand in a new way what I mean by when I say in my artist statement, does reality have a user manual? Is there a particular way one should be doing things or not? And having been working on all these things, when I came upon certain philosophers or certain writers like Giorgio Agamben, which is one of the kind of more active Italian philosophers right now, he's got all this work around le dispositif, what he calls an apparatus. It would be sort of the device. And he says, I shall call an apparatus literally anything that has in some way the capacity to capture, orient, determine, intercept model control or secures the gestures, behaviors, opinions or discourses of living beings. And then I realized, I was an interface designer for 10 years. And I didn't realize I was doing all this stuff. I didn't realize up to which point what I was doing and what I was deciding was having such an impact on how I lived in the world and how I did things. Because what this gives you access is to understanding that, everything that interests me, from cards to the notion of identity, to maps, to robots, to anything, is that they're human fabrications. We have built up this world we live around with all these things and all these ideas of who we are and what we're supposed to do or not, and how one is supposed to paint or not, and how things should glide or not, and how we should feel when we don't know what we should do, and all these things. And I've just discovered that for me, what's really interesting is all the parts that I don't know, and challenging all the things that I supposed to know. And so, in a way, I'm always trying to look out for all these new dead angles, blind spots, all these things I didn't realize, I didn't know, and finding them out. And in a way, both the performance that I show you that involved the technology, what was very powerful about them is that they made this visible. It made it very visible that we are at the origin of all this fabrication and all these truths, and suddenly people could start talking about them because they were about things that didn't seem so integrated into their daily lives. And so this really made me think about Georges Perec when he speaks about the infraordinary, and it's a really 2 pages text that I really suggest you read, because it's totally going to be worth your while and super short, and you can read it both in French and English, which will allow you to extend humongously in your vocabulary. And so he says to question the habitual, but that's just it. We are habituated to it. We don't need to question it. We don't question it. It doesn't question us. It doesn't seem to pose a problem. We live it without thinking, as if it carried within it neither question nor answers, as if it weren't the bearer of any information. This is no longer even conditioning. This is just anesthesia. We sleep through our lives in a dreamless sleep. But where is our life? And where is our body? And where is our space? And the rest of the text is even more wonderful. And this part makes even more sense when you've read the first part. So anyway, do please read it for me, just pretty please. And so now sort of you can see, and I could see to my utter relief, why all these very varied things I was interested in actually were connected and how they made sense together. And the other thing that was a great realization from these performances and things that I had been doing before is also what happened with the people. I really understood at that moment that for me the encounter is not just something I do on the side, to run a class or to give a talk. I understood at that moment that for me, the same way one writes or draws or paints, the encounter was an integral part of my art practice, and I should embrace it so. And I have been very lucky from the moment I started focusing completely on my art career to be able to collaborate with different institutions where I could be running all kinds of workshops and keynotes and different sort of work sessions. And they can be with long-term relationships like this group of my hyper ladies that are all around 80 and just kind of hang out with me, and we goof around with iPads and crazy things. And they're absolutely wonderful. And they can be much more concentrated things like discussing what a selfie means with 6-year-olds and coding some things to sort of make them realize that a screen is not a mirror, and a mirror, even a regular mirror, doesn't necessarily tell you the truth. And that you can play with that. Or things where I've even, this is a performance for a company, a big industrial company, where I was discussing with some of the experts about the notions of uncertainty and what does it mean as an expert to know everything and have the say of everything, and given everything that I've told you about, unveiling all these blind spots that you don't even realize, you know, how they suddenly realized digital and the democratization of access to tools and ways of thinking and working could completely challenge in a good way how they were operating as experts and bearers of truths and knowledge and solutions. And so this kind of gets me to the point where I am right now, which is that in the different places I've been working, one of them is the Médiathèque François Sagan. And, you know, I just kind of happened to go there and do some work sessions with my hyper ladies, and I just didn't come and do the minimum and then left. I sort of came 4 hours before I shoot and set up these huge messes and told everybody at lunchtime, and actually went to lunch with everybody and all the librarians and started kind of giving them a mini version of the workshop, and so they were kind of very interested, and I had never been around librarians, which is a very interesting crowd as well. And so we kind of fell in love with each other in a way, and so we kind of really wanted to do something more next year. And so we've just invented this residency for me that is going to start running next year. And I'm going to be working at Sagan and doing these weird, mysterious, veiled things in the corridors when there's nobody, when there's people, I don't know. I can't even tell you what's going to happen because I need to see. And the goal is to end up interacting with people and understanding that the Mediathèque can, and having a physical place where people meet around culture is not just about consuming it, but it can also be about producing it. And we're not going to go for the easy solution where I will make them do little exercises during the workshops and then we will put them and show them as, I think, like, you know, everybody did art. It's not that. And I'm not either in the whole Nicolas Bourriaud aesthetic relationnel and all this relational aesthetics thing either. It's just that by going out of my studio and getting out into the world and interacting with 80-year-olds or people who are in an errant situation at Gare de l'Est, or young kids who are at the verge of maybe leaving school because they kind of just don't dig it, that's going to make me go somewhere different from where I would do in my studio. And then things will happen and we will produce things. And from those things that we produce and those questions we open, I will further work them and I will produce a solo show. And then people will come and see the show and they will see the connection between everything that was going on and what they maybe did with me, and then how it ended up becoming a work of art. And of course, this is just my take on it. And in a way, I haven't really been telling you, I mean, I didn't want to just tell you about my theories of the device and does reality have a user manual. In a way, what I've been trying to tell you about is also like, does being an artist have a user manual? And it doesn't, like everything else. I hope you've understood that part. You just need to figure out what being an artist or a designer or whatever you want to be, how it manifests in you, what is your inner golems and your ways in which things slide just about right. And do you need to have a tissue of entangled projects that are either, you know, totally OCD or absolutely fluffy and weird, and you need to find your own brand. And for me, it was really important hearing this from another artist that was doing things that kind of made me, ça me donnait envie. I just wanted, they felt interesting. And they felt like things I would love to do. And this man is William Kentridge. And he was once talking about how he had failed to be a painter, failed to be an actor, failed to do many things, and how everybody had advised him that the problem was that he had to choose and he had to specialize. And he said, and in the end I gave up just at the age of 30 trying to say what I was, and I was someone who did drawings and theater and films, and it took me a long time to unlearn the advice I'd been given and to understand that for me the only hope was the cross-fertilization between mediums and genres. And of course you can understand that as a designer, ex-designer trained as an engineer that makes art, this completely spoke to my weirdness. And so in a way it's very freeing, because what I'm trying to say here is just work with what you have, whatever it is, at whatever point. Just work with what you have. This is probably the essential challenge that arises when you're faced with the freedom of being left to your own devices. And this is something that everybody has all the time, but we don't realize it. People probably realize it when they go into retirement or take a sabbatical. And artists are blessed and cursed to face this from the minute they decide to engage in this wonderful mess and adventure that is to try to make art. And so just make it work, whatever works. And that's all I got for you today. Thank you.
So there's a question session, or the question before? No, question first. Our question first. We have a question for you.
Awesome.
And the question that we ask to every guest is, what was your most, as we are a school, so we have a lot of students that are here, and it's very important for learning experience of the guests. So
Yeah.
What was your most meaningful learning experience in your life, or artist's life, or?
What is my most meaningful learning experience?
Meaningful, like you can take it, very widely.
I will work with what I have. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Actually, I think my answer is maybe double. I don't know. I'll see when it goes out what happens. Well, the first meaningful lesson is this ridiculous notion that learning finishes with university. Learning never finishes. This actually is a huge problem, because a lot of people just stop trying to grow and to change, and I ideally hope that the last second I have of breath in my body will be a learning experience. I will probably start kind of going into that other parallel state of mystery, which is the ultimate one, and I'll be like, oh, this is what I learned in the end, and I will certainly be clutching my soldering iron and my pen and my weird robots and between my teeth or something like that. So the first meaningful lesson is that it never stops learning, and it's directly connected probably to the other thing, which is that I think for a long time I was sort of expecting that something or somebody would sort of, I don't know, come give this thing to me, like the teachers or the school, there would be this critical thing, the thing that would be given to me, and then everything would unravel, like there's this tipping point, like in the movies, movies do, by all means, condition the way we think life will unfold. And it was really important and liberating when I realized that this was profoundly mistaken, and that, by all means, we need others and schools and teachers and artist colleagues, and especially generous artists and generous people in other fields have a lot to give us, but we shouldn't expect for them to be giving to us. It's for us to do the learning job. It's for us to do the work of learning, and we need to take ownership of it, because it is only when we are ready to listen to certain things, because we have done the work, we have gone through trying to figure out. I mean, it was super difficult to try to tell you everything I told you today. Wrecked my brains trying to put words into the things I go through and I live to, and it's got its rewards, because now I was listening to a talk of William Kentridge, to get the exact quote for you, and I was suddenly listening with new ears to certain things he was saying, because now I was ready to receive some of the things he was saying. So you need to realize it is your responsibility to learn, and things are not just going to come from outside. They just need to sparkle from inside of you, and you need to work to find them, you need to work to find these recognitions. So yeah, in a way they both connect very well, like everything in my mind somehow bizarrely connects.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any questions?
Can I just say something? It was really funny because from the beginning of the presentation I was thinking about William Kentridge.
You
And I
were?
wanted to ask you if you...
Really, I absolutely love his work.
Because I love him, I love his work as well. And I just recently bought like the book with the lectures he did at
Yes.
Harvard as well, which is
Yes.
brilliant. And the video you're talking about is brilliant as well.
Yes.
But it's when you're talking about the two different worlds, the artist is a creator, just like drawing something or working on his art, and the artist that is the observer, just looking at and
like
telling the other person like that's not going well.
and
And the conflict between those
and
two
the circulation.
worlds, and the way that he speaks, like the same way that you spoke as well, like I really liked your presentation because it was very human. You're talking about this conflict and he speaks like in a very human as well, like he doesn't have the pretense of, he's an artist and he named himself an artist when he was 30 years old out of necessity and pressure from other people, of course, but he just explains it like a game as well, everything that he's doing.
He is a very big source of inspiration for me, and don't underestimate what amazing teachers other artists can be, or other professionals in fields that are different, but you would be amazed by how connected everything is. And I went to an improvisation workshop where they taught master classes on mask work, and when I heard them speaking about how they approach improvising with the masks, they were talking about painting. So the important thing is, don't underestimate choose who you learn from. Be picky. But when you find people that have the generosity to really try to share something with you and do it, just cherish that and go back to it, because you will learn many different things from the same content as you grow and as you progress. And others are wonderful for teaching you things, and it suddenly makes you feel less alone. I mean, for me, I don't consider myself very original, but I didn't consider myself very typical either, and completely embracing my weirdness and my golemness and my interest in permutating numbers, and I never wake up in an hour that is not either symmetrical or a repetition of the cipher and things like this, and my husband loves it, by the way. Embracing all these and finding other people that are as weird as you, or that are weird in ways that you can relate to. I mean, I don't know if you went to Jean-Michel Alberola's exhibition last year, but I felt so relieved. I was sitting there and I thought, well, everything's going to be perfectly fine. I was sitting in this cold cement bench that was looking into some horrible things about Auschwitz that he had, and then on the other side there was completely different. I was sitting there surrounded by all these things, and it made so much sense to me. And when I hear Kentridge speaking, I think we're kind of related somehow in the weirdest way. These are your mentors and the best teachers, the ones you find for yourself, like, the family, the friends you find for yourself are. And so cherish them and look for them, and never go on thirsty or about learning more, because the thing that makes it worth it. The only thing we have is that we're going to keep changing. So either we resist it or we embrace it and we try to learn and we try to grow and spend our times in the studio going crazy with the golem.
Did you build the robot?
No, it's a platform. I kind of adapted it.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions? Nobody online? Sorry. Yeah.
How does the robot move? Because I saw there were 2 strings at the top.
Yeah. So you've got 2 motors, and they have a string attached. So by rotating the strings, you've got this triangle. It goes like, it gives you the coordinates. They go up to the sides, to down. So that's, and then you've got the lift up and down.
Does it give pressure to the machine? The pipe?
No, you've got one. You give the pressure. That's one of the things that you can get to do. So he will just kind of lift and lift and lift. But drop. Thank you. Drop's good. I buy drop. Okay. So he lifts and drops because he has one motor, little servo, but he cannot press, and that's where it's interesting. I mean, this thing you don't even need to really hack into the code or anything, or even in the electronics. Just using it in the wrong way is already super rich. And I'm in the process of tinkering with a misuser guide for this thing, and sort of these whole stories I was telling myself about. These whole myths about his hesitating and all the wrong things you can do with him that are wonderful wrong things and are so very right in a way. So
does it work if you have it horizontal or upside down?
No, it needs to be vertical, this particular setup, but you can kind of alter it. There's different options for altering it and doing things with it.
And it can do kind of, 3-dimensional. So for example, if it's holding a hot iron, can it drive through like a plastic?
I can see an installation forming in your mind already. You would need to sketch that for me, but I don't think it can go 3-dimensional. I think it might be able to draw in a sort of roundy kind of face like an egg thing, but I'm not sure about the iron thing.
Because what you mentioned about the pen lifting,
Yes.
that already gives a depth to it. So for
Yes.
example, if you have a hot iron, it just dips in and out,
Yeah.
and it has that distance that
You can etch somehow.
Yeah.
The thing is that you would need to hack so that you get much more precise control of the servo that is doing the lifting. And the thing with the lifting is that it's kind of clunk clunk, you know. The way the mechanical mechanism for lifting is done, you would actually have to design a more controlled contraption, which could be very easy with, either cutting it or with the laser cutter or the 3D printer. You just kind of make your own piece. And I mean, this platform is good in that way that I could see many ways. Of course, I've got them in the department of speculation on the specific file. All the things I could do by tangibly enhancing it with hardware or software, but I try not to be tempted to go with the very complex project, because just kind of, it's like with my arm, just making my arm move was already super interesting. And now we're trying to get more things move or another thing to move, and then combining maybe the brain with something else. But it's good to kind of go by steps and just maybe getting to work the hot iron in a very basic way and then kind of moving on. But it's definitely something you can do, absolutely. You need to tell me about it when you've done it.
Do you get to sell the drawings, or how do you?
Yes, I sell my work. This particular series, a lot of people have wanted to break the series and buy individual drawings. There's people have these very intense reactions to them, and some people really want to owe some of them. But I don't want to break the series, so I would actually either sell the whole thing or wait a bit.
Even from the 5 days? Or would
Say
you,
that again?
even from the 5 days that you did with the biennial?
Yeah, it's a series. Yeah, it works together. It's not the same piece if you break it up. It's something else. There can be very nice individual drawings, but it's not my intention. My intention is something else. So the integrity of the work and how you think of the work is essential, and I'd rather do more workshops and get the money that way than break the integrity of the piece. It doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, what I think is very interesting about these drawings and the other ones, the errands and the weird guys that appeared at the beginning, I don't know if you remember them. I went through them very quickly because I was very scared I couldn't finish my talk. I do get very scared sometimes, but I think I'm good at reassuring myself. What is very interesting about all these works is how much people tell me about them. I believe maybe it's because they don't come from a place where I could have invented them in a way. I feel they have not a lot to do with me in a way. I don't feel like the author a lot of them. It's like something else is working in me, and in a way it gives a lot of space to people. So I have found a particularly strong reaction of people to really kind of focusing on some drawings and really wanting some of them. So it's interesting to address it, what does it mean if people want to own some of them, but not for the moment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, it was lovely. Thanks for having me.